And our speaker this evening is Steve Walker from, and I always have to say it and not do the abbreviation, but from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Um, Steve is a wildlife biologist with close to 30 years of experience with Maine's biodiversity, working as a land use consultant, town planner, regional land protection specialist for Maine Coast Heritage Trust. That's probably how I know you. And coordinator of the Beginning with Habitat program for Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. He lives in Brunswick, where he served on the planning board for 7 years and is now in his third term as town councilor. Steve is convinced that Maine's best hope for effective resource protection and building lasting climate resiliency is at the local level. So take it away, Steve. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. So do I have permission to share now?
I think so.
Yeah, you should, since you're a panelist. Yeah.
Okay, let me just fire this up. And go to from beginning. Can you all see that?
I do.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Anne, for that introduction. Again, I'm a wildlife biologist at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And tonight, I just wanted to give an overview of a program we call Beginning with Habitat, which I'm the coordinator, and talk about how we feel our most effective way of preserving Maine's natural heritage is working one-on-one with communities through this program. And especially now with the changing climate, how we're planning for that and what sort of advice we're giving towns for their plans. I'm just going to go quickly through the program, talk a little bit about climate change and how it affects plants and animals, and show you, talk at the very end about some of the tools we suggest the towns consider when they're working on their policies and strategies for comprehensive plans. So without further ado, I wanted to start with all the doom and gloom these days. I wanted to start with a celebration of Bangor. So a few of my introductory slides here just to do that. This is the brook floater. It's a state threatened species. It's one of the most imperiled aquatic invertebrates in North America. It's a freshwater mussel that lives in freshwater rivers. This isn't a marine species or tidal species. There's probably 300 freshwater mussels in North America, and almost 75% of them are listed as threatened or endangered or special concern, you name it, because of water quality issues. In your very own Kentucky, you probably have one of the most robust populations of brook floater of anywhere in the state, which is very notable. In southern Maine and mid-coast, we're seeing these guys blink out as more and more riparian corridor is lost and more fish passage is lost and things of that nature. But the Kentucky is holding on. If you don't know much about freshwater mussels, they're a really cool species. They're sort of a hitchhiker in that they, just like a marine clam, will embed in the bed of a stream. And when they breed, they produce, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but you see this lure over here. They'll produce this thing that attracts fish. And the Kentucky is probably trout, maybe smallmouth bass or something of that nature. And when the fish goes after that, they get this surprise of a mouthful of glaucidia, which are the very larval form of freshwater mussels, which grow in the gills. They need that fresh, clean water to reach not maturity, but when they let go and then fall back to the substrate and become adults. So a pretty cool life cycle, but it depends on a lot of factors. One of those is certainly aquatic connectivity. One issue the department has been working with through our fisheries department and partners for quite a while is culverts. Undersized and poorly installed culverts have really fragmented fish populations statewide. It's been especially impactful on our native brook trout populations. because they need that cold water refugia upstream. So they not only use one portion of the stream, but will go up into small tributaries in the summer to find that cold water refugia and really move around the landscape a lot. Other things like erosion, poorly buffered agriculture, loss of riparian habitats, all these things affect the water quality that brook floaters and other aquatic species throughout the state rely on. All right, the celebration number 2, you have native populations of brook trout, wild brook trout within city limits, which is pretty darn cool. You can't say that about Portland or South Portland, but in Bangor, the lower Pinchajawak and Meadowbrook drainage has a self-breeding population of native brook trout, a cool water species that needs all those factors I just talked about in terms of clean water and good riparian habitats. We've also been able to successfully stock brook trout in areas along the Kenduskeag. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, those orange dots, those are where our stocking areas are currently. And on the left-hand side, of course, that red part of that lower drainage is where we know there's that reproducing wild brook trout population. Brook trout, I wanted to pause here for a minute because brook trout are actually a forest species. People, of course, associate them with ponds and streams, but without a large forest buffer, an intact forest system that drops wood and debris into the stream, creating riffles and pools, these guys don't do very well. They also need that thermal protection and water quality protection from the adjacent forests. On the very left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a map of the eastern US, and the yellows and greens represent where brook trout are still doing okay, whereas the orange and reds and the grays, most of the range, they've blinked out. Maine is one of the last strongholds, and something to be really proud of. And it's also an opportunity, a great planning opportunity we have to get riparian buffer protection and water quality protection right. Whereas in a lot of southern New England states and further down south, that opportunity is not going to come back, and they've lost this great fishery. All right, another thing to celebrate: the Pinchajawak. Come on, who is a great resource. It's a very diverse wetland. On the left here, you can see the bird diversity. We've got multiple state listed endangered, threatened, special concern species, and that doesn't include the multitude of species of greatest conservation need, invertebrates that we know are out there in this really cool system to have right in the heart of your city. It's also one of 140 focus areas of statewide ecological significance in the state. It's the southern terminus of what we call our Caribou Bog wetland complex. It's being within a focus area. It's nothing regulatory or anything you have to worry about. But it's a designation that will help should the city want to apply for land protection grants down the road, whether Land for Maine's Future or Maine Natural Resource Conservation Program. Being in a focus area just gets you up in that upper echelon of being eligible for funds that other towns and cities may not be. So again, something cool to celebrate. And lastly, you look at Bangor and you have the core elements for a long-term habitat resiliency. You've got, between the Bangor forest and the Pinchajawak, you've got a huge block of land up there, over 2,000 acres in size, contiguous acres. You've got green belts along the Kenduskeag that sort of form a corridor connection north-south, which is very important for species movement, especially with climate change. Having large blocks of unfragmented land plus these riparian corridors, these are the basic elements of what, beginning with habitat, tries to promote town by town across the state. You also have local gems like Saxel Park. I was talking to one of our invertebrate biologists the other day, and she said, "Oh yeah, highlight Saxel Park because we're as an agency we're getting very concerned about pollinators, especially bumblebees that are steeply declining." And she was telling me that she caught 9 different species of bumblebee right at Saxel, including this red-belted bumblebee, which is pretty uncommon for the state that you can see there. So again, neat habitat types that are very functional and very healthy right in city limits. All right, so let's get down to our department and our charge. We are responsible for managing all inland fisheries and wildlife, which total about 15,000, a little more than 15,000 species statewide, if you include invertebrates, which are definitely the bulk of that. But it's a big lift for a very small agency. Most of our funds, of course, come from hunted fish species, which only about 100 of these are. So the rest of those, we really depend on partners to help if we're going to conserve long term. And in Maine, just like that brook trout photo I showed you, we have an opportunity to really plan well for a ecologically resilient landscape. This is a enhanced night sky photo. If you haven't seen this before, you can see just how dark Maine is up here versus the Boston to Washington metropolitan area, which just is lit right up. And you can imagine there's not many big blocks of habitat, not many intact riparian areas left down there. So we have an opportunity here in Maine, town by town, to really save some of the diversity and respond to the biodiversity crisis that we're in right now. Just like a town doing comprehensive planning, the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife also has to plan. We have limited resources, limited staff, and with those 15,000 species we're responsible, we've got to prioritize, certainly. So we do a wildlife action plan. Our last update was in 2015. And in that, we reviewed as many species as we have information and surveys for, and came up with about 378 species, which we call species of greatest conservation need. Most of those are either species at the southern limit of their range or northern limit of their range or specialized habitats. You may, I'm sure Anne has seen this slide before, but this is something that when you overlap where existing infrastructure is and where growth occurs, it's pretty striking that the overlap between highest diversity on the left-hand side of the screen being the darker green and where future growth patterns on the right-hand side are overlap. So you can see what we're trying to plan for and sort of what I wouldn't say the emergency is, but the opportunity to safeguard our diversity as we grow as expected and as the state so needs. And in Maine, of course, we're a home rule state. So we've got 492 potential conservation partners in this game. Beginning with habitat, its purpose is to work directly with each town, not telling you what to do, but to try to figure out solutions that work where you are at as a municipality, based on your resources, based on political will, and based on growth projections. We offer a whole range of tools. We're certainly happy to meet committees in person, review language, review plans, you name it. Because as I've said several times now, our department really depends on our local partners if we're going to safeguard Maine's natural heritage. We do, of course, have the Endangered Species Act. It's got 52 species listed in it now, but this is sort of the hammer that we don't like to use. These are species that are on the edge. We don't want to see any more on that list. It's expensive to manage these, and it's it can be a regulatory challenge at the local level and for development. So our purpose with beginning with habitat is to proactively help communities avoid future listings and work directly with landowners and conservation partners like land trusts throughout the state to try to piece together a landscape that can keep common species common while also safeguarding those specialized species and declining species like the species of greatest conservation need I referenced. How we do that in one way is a series of maps, which we have 3 primary maps, one which highlights your wetlands, your riparian areas, your streams, your brook trout habitats, your ponds, even heritage brook trout waters, wetlands, aquifers. We try to put all the sort of water related issues on one map so you can see how they're interrelated. We also highlight aquifers. Our second map is your rare species. These are basically the chocolate chips and the cookies. These are where rare plants are, rare animals, rare natural communities, as well as some of the regulated features like inland wading bird and waterfowl habitats, which are wrapped into resource protection locally, and deer wintering areas as well, and other significant habitat types. And then finally, another core map in the package is our unfragmented habitat block map. It shows conserved lands. It also shows potential connections for wildlife to move across the landscape. So those core elements, again, riparian connections, trying to protect those where they can link together core habitat blocks for species movement. And then, of course, safeguarding some of those chocolate chips and the cookies, those rare plants and animals that may require specialized local zoning. Throwing the whole monkey wrench of climate change, though, and it sort of changes our thinking a little bit. You might have seen this graphic before, which is supposed to visually depict how Maine's climate could shift. We're likely to have something more like Massachusetts, maybe as much of a difference as West Virginia or Delaware, depending on the climate change scenario. So what does that mean for species? Well, as biologists, we certainly ask ourselves that. So about 10 years ago, we put together this document. Is basically a vulnerability analysis of Maine's habitats and species, looking at direct impacts, indirect impacts, and then other stressors that may or may not be obvious when you're thinking about a warming planet. So to quickly go over some of these obvious ones, air and water temperatures are going to increase. We're looking at precipitation changes, of course, and all these things not only affect species and their habitats, but infrastructure, agriculture, forestry, you name it. Increased storms and flooding. You guys don't have to worry about sea level rise or nearshore ocean acidification, but those are big topics along Maine's coast already, since the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than most other coastal water bodies. So those are the direct, and then indirect changes. We're already seeing longer growing seasons. We expect with that habitat changes in terms of southern tree species and plant species moving in, more cold or less warm tolerant species moving further north. We're going to see changes in species interaction, whether that's new species coming in or ranges shifting. Phenology changes. I don't know, up there folks may already be seeing white snowshoe hares running around in a snow-free environment at times of the year, where you had species that have evolved on the landscape and for conditions that have been pretty steady for 10,000 years, but now are all of a sudden changing. You start seeing flowers opening before pollinators are around, or fruit ripening before birds are around. And then non-climate stressors go along with these. Are we going to see more migration into the state of Maine? I think we've seen some of that with COVID, but may see more movement as the mid-Atlantic warms up and the Southwest runs out of water. And all this can lead to further habitat loss and fragmentation. Increase invasive species. We now have conditions that favor things like the hemlock woolly adelgid. We're starting to see southern pine beetle come into southern Maine. Increased diseases. Certainly, we've seen a decline in moose with this further survival of moose tick through the winter. Pollution, especially in the marine environment right now with the warming waters, we're seeing nitrogen really spike. A lot of algal blooms along our clam flats and elsewhere, but also this is happening in freshwater lakes and streams as well with warming water. So at the end of the day, that vulnerability analysis, we had 76 scientists reviewing things. These were outside of the department. We reviewed 431 species, and for the most part, it was eye-opening in terms of how many species, vulnerable species now are even more vulnerable with climate change factors at hand. One real obvious example of that is Katahdin arctic, a butterfly that only lives up on the tablelands of Mount Katahdin. Very habitat specific, very vulnerable to habitat change, and quite frankly, nowhere else to go. Other species certainly are much less vulnerable, but planning for those now and planning for a resilient landscape is going to be key to keeping them around. So how do we do that? One approach that really works well at beginning with habitat is this concept called conserving the stage, or conserving nature's stage, where if you think of a habitat or a landscape as a collection of different features, whether it's geology, hills, wetlands, you name it, the mix of those together, the different landforms, and underlying geology together will drive the species diversity. So the species that are out there now may not be the ones we have to deal with in the future, but having the clean water, having the large forest blocks, having the unusual calcareous ledges or hillsides, you name it, having those still intact and not completely fragmented, regardless of what species we have in Maine in the future, the conditions will still be there. The stage will be there and functions can occur as normal. Just some examples: soil types, topographic conditions, geological conditions, all things to think about when you're thinking about creating a stage for diversity locally. And of course, here on the coast, salt marsh migration is big with sea level rise, but core to begin with habitat, maintaining those blocks and corridor connections are key. So, okay, getting down to a comprehensive plan and thinking through strategies and policies. And again, beginning with habitat is on hand at any time to help the city work through some of these things. But certainly conserving your rare plant and animal habitats, like around the Pinjadjuwak, the city's done a great job. There's still opportunities to buffer that system more, to buffer Kentuskig more, to look more closely at the Penobscot frontage. There's plenty of opportunities in town. Increasing local stream setbacks. Our department routinely recommends a 100-foot setback on all freshwater streams, no cut, because it's a pain in the neck to enforce cutting restrictions. So if you have a no cut 100 feet, that's about enough room to safeguard those brook trout for trees to get big, fall over, land in the stream, and create good habitat. Wetland setbacks, I saw in one of your former comprehensive plan, there's a strategy for more wetland protection. I would really encourage the city to look at former state planning office model wetland ordinance, which would allow the city to recoup some of the lost square footage of wetlands that DEP exempts from impacts. It's a neat tool. It allows it doesn't stop people from impacting wetlands, but it allows the city to collect a fee that then you can put into restoring wetlands elsewhere or acquiring new lands to buffer streams or wetlands elsewhere in the city. Limiting further fragmentation. Look hard at where the city accepts roads in the rural area or how roads are built. Culverts are one of the biggest issues we have now with fisheries, but road crossings also impact terrestrial habitats as well and connectivity between large forest blocks. Infrastructure standards, work with your public works department. We've got programs on hand, Stream Smart being one of them, that can help your public works department get up to speed with the latest and greatest in terms of protecting habitat while they go about new infrastructure installations, as well as maintaining and enhancing what you already have. And stormwater, is certainly going to be bigger and speaks to the need for greater riparian protection as we're going to see more frequent rainfall and heavier rainfall. So again, nothing really new came from our dive into climate change, resiliency, and vulnerability. But the things beginning with Habitat has been promoting now for 20 years, maintaining those unfragmented blocks, riparian corridors, and making sure we're working with the diverse areas in our landscape currently are still core to planning resiliency for habitat and local conservation. So that's all I have tonight, Anne, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I'll stop sharing here.
I don't have any beginning questions. Anya, do you have any?
I do have quite a few, actually.
Oh, good. Go ahead.
So first off, sorry for not introducing myself earlier, but first, my background's in environmental science, so I'm really interested in this. Yeah. But also, I actually moved here from North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains, and I actually didn't know there were brook trout here, so that's really interesting. And I remember my husband fishing with him in one of the streams there, and like talking about just how hard it was to find brook trout anymore. So the fact that we have a lot of them here is really, really cool. But one of my questions was, you mentioned Saxel Park, and Saxel Park, I know there's a big meadow area, and that's next to Dorothea Dix, but there's also a parcel next to it that's partly forested and stuff. So I'm wondering if that was considered as part of Saxel Park when all the bumblebee species were found, because that area is for sale. And could be developed. So
I think where the bumblebee work was done was in the old meadow part up near the hospital. So I'm not familiar with the forested parcel, but that's interesting that there may be an opportunity there.
Yeah. And I did walk through Saxel Park last summer. And it's interesting there's so many species there, because most of what I saw was like Queen Anne's lace and not native species. It was almost a monoculture. So it's interesting there were that many species there.
Yeah, it's an unusual site. We even have grassland birds that are breeding out there in the meadow too, which is, again, pretty unusual for the area.
Interesting. So I wanted to get clarification. I kind of missed what you said on the stream buffer. Did you say 100 feet is ideal?
That's our recommendation. Shoreland zoning, as you know, typically is 75 feet below the confluence of two perennial streams, yada, yada, yada. But we feel the headwater streams are even more important, those cold headwater streams and headwater wetlands. So we recommend wherever you have the criteria for a DEP stream, that scoured mineral bottom, aquatic insects, flows, 100 foot no cut is really the way to go long term.
Okay. And then what about wetland buffers? What would you say is the best buffer distance for that?
It really depends. I mean, some of them, your typical forested wetland, you're not really going to need much of anything in terms of a functional buffer, depending on the context. But if you have a vernal pool or something like that, you're talking a functional life zone that could go out hundreds of feet. Not that you need that whole buffer, but each wetland has different functions and values that would require different buffering. Certainly wetlands of special significance, the state already has a regulatory zone around, whereas smaller isolated forested wetlands probably don't need that much.
Okay.
So I'm not really answering, there's not a real typical one, but there is a great book out there that I could get you that has a whole range of buffers based on the resource and quality of the resource that I'd be happy to get you guys as a reference.
Yeah, because we have a ton of wetlands. And I know that I've been looking at all this stuff today actually in GIS, so it's pertinent. But yeah, I mean, we have a few like this, the Pinjajawak and some other significant wetlands that are in that shoreline zone, but so many of them are just not.
Right.
So I just want to be sure that we're adequately protecting those with buffers if we need to. And then as far as vernal pools, I think we do have a few in city limits.
Yeah, I can't remember if you've got significant vernal pools or not. I'm sure you have vernal pools.
Yeah, we do have a few, and I don't know how old our data is. We may need to get those remapped, but I did see at least one was in, or at least next to a subdivision that was put in a while back. So I'd be really interested to kind of see, maybe updating that data and also, looking at what we need as far as buffers, because I know the species that use those pools can travel quite a distance. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I should have said up front, I'm not sure if you have the latest and greatest data from us, but we'd be more than happy to get you the most recent we have.
Yeah, what do we have?
And then my last question is, I know it's important to maintain these large tracts of undeveloped land and connect those, but I also think it's important to encourage people, even in town, any property owner, to create habitat on their own property and kind of create corridors that way. And so I was just wondering if you guys have any programs for that, or if that's a focus at all, or if you're just focused on the
Absolutely. And for the sake of time, I trimmed out a few slides, but rewilding is something every landowner could do, or, the city could do on properties. It's a great effective way, not only for pollinators, but migratory birds, small mammals, you name it. Just adding to the quality of habitat piece by piece, it adds up and it makes a difference. We do have a gentleman in the Beginning with Habitat program named Joe Roy, who would be happy to work one-on-one with property owners. You can get his contact information from our website, and that's what his job is. He comes out, he meets with people, suggests ways to enhance habitat on private property or municipal property or even land trust property. So encourage you, if you've got a site in Bangor, give us a call.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Dominic, did you have a question at all?
Oh, yep. Bring him over.
Go ahead.
Hey, Dominic.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Just wanted to, first of all, thank you, Steve. It was a wonderful and very informative talk. My partner and I are sitting here just finishing dinner while watching this.
Thank you, Dominic.
You provided us with so much wonderful information. I have a couple of questions in regard to like the mall area and Stillwater.
Yeah.
Are the studies recent enough to see how those areas that are bordering the wetlands, how they're doing, and if there's anything else more that we should be doing? And that's my first question. I don't know whether to give my second question right now, and then I'll say.
Go ahead if you want, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we were just, rewilding is the term. The neighborhood, downtown neighborhoods, would it be a good thought to, like, we have all these esplanades, that, the little piece of, the strip of land between the road and our sidewalks? Would that be helpful for those of us to just let them go a little wild and just like, flower seeds and stuff like that on a small note?
If it's within city code, Dominic, yes, I would say every little bit can help. Certainly, a lot of the pollinators are migratory and they're just passing through and would benefit from even just the cover, not even if there's no flowering plants there. So every little bit helps. In terms of Stillwater Avenue, I haven't been down behind those buildings in years. I guess the biggest concern would probably be invasive species and runoff, but I'm not sure what the status is. Maybe Ann or Anja could give you more of an idea.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of development, the big change back in there is at the end of Gilman Road is a permitted solar farm. I mean, it's in the upland portion, but it's it's definitely in that watershed. So and I know DEP has been evaluating when they look at solar farms, sort of looking at the effects on stormwater and things like that. So we're kind of waiting to see more from them on that.
Yeah, depending on the size, we often comment on them, but it's again, a solar farm is still an opportunity for pollinator habitat. So hopefully the developers,
Yeah, we had one come in, our most recent one. They said they were gonna reseed with pollinator, make a pollinator meadow on the whole solar farm. So that was really neat.
Yeah, that's good. So that maintains some of the quality of the habitat.
Yeah.
Right.
But I will say, Dominic, I've talked to Code about this actually, because I wanted to rewild my esplanade. And I mean, there is something in the code about you can't like weeds get above a certain height, but you can plant things in there. They just don't want you to plant like shrubs, but you can plant grasses and flowers and things like that. And there's lists out there of plants that are, that can tolerate those kinds of conditions, because it's going to be exposed to road salt and things like that. I have my own plant list if you're interested. So.
Yes, we are interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did want to mention that I'm part of the beautification committee and we are meeting tomorrow, but I think on our agenda is talking about removing some of the invasive species along the lower Kenduskeag stream. So that's going to be something that we will be looking into. So I'm hoping that that's obviously a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Come and actually point out different species that we could or should be removing, I believe, but I'll find out more.
Who's organizing that?
I'm sorry?
Who's organizing that?
The beautification committee,
Oh, okay. Interesting.
the downtown beautification committee. Yeah.
Okay.
You're welcome to join us. Anyway,
That's a great group.
When did you say that was happening?
tomorrow at from 4:30 to 5:30 at the what's the brewery on Exchange Street? Black Bear.
Okay.
4:30 to 5:30. And normally try to keep it to that time.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
that's great. Thank you, Dominic.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So in terms of updated information, any updates you have on, any of the work, any of the natural resources is really helpful to us, because we do have a couple of zoning tools, in our code right now for resource protection that go beyond shoreland.
Yep.
So we do have the ability to, to really look at wildlife habitats as a sort of an overlay, you know, that goes across property lines type of thing.
Mhm.
So, so yeah, anything that you have to help us with that is good, because, you know, obviously we want to be data driven as much as we can. And I mean, we recognize that things move and change, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're thinking overlay district. I think that's a good flexible tool for dealing with some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Dominic or Anya?
No, I'm good.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for doing this for us. That was a great
Thank-
presentation.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. And like I said, you know, down the line, as you guys are putting the plan together, feel free to call on us. We'd be happy to bounce language back and forth or give you suggestions from what other towns have done.
Yeah,
Whatever
that
we-
would be great. As we look at the inventory and analysis, we'll send you those chapters for you to take a look at. That would be
Great.
great. All right.
Happy to do it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and
Yeah.
have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.